We are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret society, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast, everyone. This is Abe, your host. It is 5:38 a.m., Saturday, April the 2nd. Just got off work. It was a pretty chill night. Not too much stuff to stock, so that was always nice. Just had to work at just a steady pace. Didn't have to rush, which tomorrow is a double truck, so that'll be my rush day. As far as updates, that's about it. Just living life, working. Today we are going to finish up the two-parter of Amelia Elizabeth Dyer. She is the baby farmer. So, let's get on with the show. A second letter was also read out. This was addressed to my poor dear Arthur and ran, "Oh, how my heart ached for you and my dear Polly. I am sending this to tell you I have eased my mind and made a full statement. I have told them the truth and nothing but the truth. As I hope to be forgiven, God Almighty is my judge, and I dare not go into his presence with a lie. I hope and pray God will forgive me. I know I have done this dreadful crime and shall have to answer for it. I hope God will give you grace and strength to bear this heavy trial. God bless you, my dear boy, for your broken-hearted mother." From your broken-hearted mother. Mrs. Gibbs reported that the prisoner talked to a good deal to herself in Gaol and told her on completing the two letters, "I have eased my mind." The patron told her, "Letter of this kind will plead guilty," to which Annie replied, "I wish to. They cannot charge me with anything more than I have done." Annie wept while the letters were read out. After this dramatic episode, Polly Palmer was called to give evidence. She referred to the occasion when she went with her mother to Paddington Station and returned with the child. Harry Simmons to the house at Willesden. Her mother indicated that she was going to put the boy to bed in another room and told her, "Don't come in for a few minutes." Later, Polly saw the child lying on a couch covered with her mother's shawl. She asked if he was asleep. "Yes," said her mother. Her mother would not allow her to come too near, saying that Polly would wake him. After supper, Polly suggested preparing some food for the boy, but her mother said she would make it herself. Annie appeared highly protective, allowing none to touch the child and telling the others in the house not to go into the room. The following morning, she answered inquiries with, "The baby's all right, don't worry about him." Polly noticed a parcel on the floor beneath the couch in the room her mother used and spotted some tape was missing from her work box. Later, her mother asked her for a brick. When Annie prepared to leave the house, the parcel had gone, but she was carrying her carpet bag. Polly said to her, "What will the neighbors think if they saw you coming here with a baby and going away without it?" Her mother replied, "You can make some excuse." This damaging evidence from her daughter, plus her own confession, made Annie's committal for trial certain. She was taken under escort to London by train. The blinds of her compartment were drawn to defeat the curiosity of sensation seekers. Annie arrived at Paddington Station, where, a matter of months before, she had taken charge of Harry Simmons, wearing a long dark cloak and carrying some personal effects in a brown paper parcel, an ironic hallmark. She was whisked away in a four-wheeler to Holloway Gaol to await trial. While in prison, Annie was visited by various doctors who inquired into her sanity. Dr. George Henry Savage, a noted specialist on mental problems, examined her on the 11th of May, 1896, in the presence of Dr. James Scott, the prison's medical officer. Dr. Savage reported that she was sane. There is no evidence of insanity in her of any kind whatsoever. That she has been in several asylums as a patient, but the symptoms were always of a transient nature, and such as might be explained by her then circumstances, or she having been an asylum attendant might have been simulated. There is not sufficient evidence of defect of memory to make me think the prisoner is in any way irresponsible for her acts. Dr. Forbes Winslow, who examined Annie on the 15th and 19th of May, came to a contrary conclusion. She gave me the impression, he wrote, of a good old carefully attired monthly nurse, but not of murderous type. Nevertheless, he believed she was a person of unsound mind, suffering from delusions and hallucinations. She told him, "I often hear voices telling me to go and do certain things, and I go and do it. I can't recollect anything about these children, but I hear voices every night, and I do not know what to do. The sounds I hear and the sights I see are dreadful." On the 22nd of May, Annie Dyer was tried at the Old Bailey before Mr. Justice Hawkins. She was indicted for the murders of Doris Marmon and Harry Simmons, but was tried only on the first charge. Mr. A.T. Lawrence appeared for the prosecution, and she was again defended by Mr. Capadia. Much of the evidence repeated that given in the magistrate's court at Reading. Polly Palmer's testimony was especially damaging and virtually put a noose around her mother's neck. She as good as told the court that Annie's asylum visits were simple dodges to avoid being pressed by worried mothers whose children she had taken in. It was obvious that Polly could not remember the dates and other details of much of this baby traffic because transactions were made at bewildering speed. She admitted taking in 2 children herself at Caversham. As the results of placing newspaper advertisements, she also confessed that one had died. Polly voiced her suspicion of little Harry Simmons' fate at her mother's hand. She mentioned the dramatic moment at the Wildishan house when she saw a brown paper parcel with the end curiously resembling the shape of a baby's head. The court was left in little doubt that when Annie was sent off to Paddington Station, her carpet bag contained the corpses of 2 murdered infants. The defense did not deny the prisoner's guilt, but maintained she was insane and incapable of discriminating between right and wrong. A debate ensued on the question of Annie's sanity, and the 2 doctors who had issued lunacy certificates at Bristol in 1893 and 1894 were called to substantiate their opinions. Dr. Frederick Logan said Dyer had been violent and suffered from delusions. At one point, she had rushed at him with a poker, threatening to break his skull. She had told him she had heard voices telling her to kill herself. Mr. Capadia kept up this line of argument when he questioned Dr. Forbes Winslow. "It is not a fact," he asked, "that people thus affected, people who talk to themselves often commit murder? The doctor replied simply, yes. But before he could elaborate, the judge intervened, remarking, people often commit murder who do not talk to themselves. This produced laughter in what was otherwise a rather dull trial. Dr. Forbes Winslow testified to the interviews which he had conducted with Annie in prison and referred to her delusions and hallucinations. Mr. Justice Hawkins asked for the distinction to be made between the two, and the doctor obliged at some length. The judge, obviously none the wiser, testily remarked that one might very well pass for the other. Undaunted, Dr. Forbes Winslow went on. Then there are the illusions, but the judge cut this short with, I do not want the run through Dr. Johnson's dictionary in this matter. The doctor was nevertheless allowed to convey to the court the essence of Annie Dyer's mental state, on the basis of which he claimed she was insane. He asked her, what had they put you in the asylum for? She answered, I was depressed and low, and I did things I ought not to. What do you mean by that? I have attempted to destroy myself and tried every way to do so, but they won't permit me. How is it that you do not succeed in your attempt to cut your throat? My daughter was too quick and snatched the knife away. A picture was built up of a person in the grip of depression, but whose every attempt at self-destruction was thwarted. Questioned about the voices she heard, commanded her to do, Annie had said, to kill myself. I feel I am bound to it, and therefore I want to do it. At the asylum at Gloucester, they beat and cruelly ill-treated me, and put me in a padded room, and I felt it would be no sin to destroy myself. She alleged that her husband was cruel to her, and that her mother had died in an asylum. She said she could not sleep and told Dr. Forbes Winslow, I had a curious sensation, and thought I was going through the floor, bed and all. Her visions included the spirit of my poor boy, Willie. I fancy I could handle his bones, and that I was picking them out of the ground. And of her mother who frequently talked to her, telling Annie to come to her. She also spoke of beating the rats off who were gnawing on my body, and the worms were eating me up. The prosecution, Dr. James Scott, Holloway Prison's doctor, stated he had observed the prisoner since she had been admitted. He had talked to her daily, and while she was inclined to dwell on past events and on her attempts at suicide, he did not see any signs of insanity. This view was corroborated by Dr. Savage, who concluded quite simply that she was not mentally unsound. Moreover, the notion that there was a family background of insanity tended to be disproved by Annie's brother, who had stated that their mother had not been insane. In the closing speeches on the second day of the trial, Mr. Capadia maintained that the prisoner was insane, a contention supported by the lack of motive for the murders. This rather thin argument was easily contested by the prosecutor, who pointed out that the motive was transparently one of avarice. The babies had been murdered for the 10 pounds per head extracted from their unwitting mothers. Mr. Justice Hawkins was eminently fair in his summing up, but he obviously did not think a great deal of the insanity plea. It was not sufficient, he pointed out to the jury, to say that her brain was affected, that she had insomnia or had visions and delusions and heard voices. He also pointed out that in her letter of confession the prisoner had made no suggestion that she was mad at the time she committed the acts of which she stood charged. The jury retired at 8:30 p.m. and returned just 5 minutes later to pronounce Annie Dyer guilty with the plea of insanity not proved. Throughout the trial, Annie, abandoned to her fate by her daughter and son-in-law, had remained expressionless. The announcement of the jury's decision produced no change. When the judge asked her if she had anything to say, her dulled eyes and lips moved imperceptibly, but no words were uttered. The court was in silent awe as the black cap was placed on the judge's head and he addressed the prisoner. Mr. Justice Hawkins, known as the Iron Judge, told her, "There is no knowing to what lengths you have carried your ruthless schemes. The number of your innocent victims can never be ascertained, but it is safe to deduce from the evidence the fact that there were many." He said she had been convicted on overwhelming evidence and was guilty of base and wicked treachery to the mother of the child she so cruelly murdered. "I can but implore you," he said, "to think no more of this world, but to prepare yourself to meet Almighty God. Pray in the meantime until your end comes to Him, who alone can pardon you your great sin and forgive you, to be more merciful to you than you were to those poor innocent, unprotected infants." With that, he passed formal sentence of death, and Annie, already sagging, was half carried from the dock. Dr. Forbes Winslow thought the judge had been unusually severe. He had evidently made up his mind at an early period, he wrote later. He still maintained that Annie Dyer was a lunatic and remarked, "It is a very easy thing to say that people are shamming insanity." He believed that the prosecution were determined to hang the wretched woman, and she therefore met her fate. The infamous reading baby farmer spent her last days in Newgate Gaol. She wrote a few letters, was visited by her daughter, and quite possibly was tortured by dreams of the kind she had mentioned to Dr. Forbes Winslow. It was alleged that she made several attempts to deny the executioner by taking her own life. If that was so, she was thwarted right to the end, for one of her consistent complaints was that the asylum authorities had prevented her killing herself. On June 5th, as prisoner number 1909, Annie wrote to a friend from the condemned cell, quote, "I have made a will in favor of my dear child, Polly. I am thankful to say I have seen my dear child this morning. I was glad to see her looking so well, dear child. I am sure God will bless her. She, like myself, could not talk much of business matters. God only knows how grieved I am to know she is suffering for no fault of her own. She did nothing. She knew nothing. Neither did Arthur. I am speaking truthfully. The girl is innocent of the charge against her. I only wish it could be managed that she could have the same counsel I had. The home, I believe, is not yet sold up at Reading. I am afraid Granny is not keeping things together. Each time I saw her at Reading, she was wearing my clothes, and as she had her own, she had not wear mine. I have sent Polly my wedding ring and a few other small things I have here. Poor Arthur, I have troubled him about him a great deal. Kindly write to Arthur. I am speaking truthfully. Both of them are innocent of any crime. What can I say more? I am yours sincerely, Amelia Dyer." Poor Arthur had, of course, been taken to Devon to answer a charge there, and my dear child Polly was in prison at Reading, waiting to be tried for the murder of the Golding baby. Polly was allowed to visit her mother at Newgate, and Annie's last letter was to her daughter. "My dear child, may God Almighty bless you and keep you. It was a great relief to me to know that you would not be prosecuted. I knew it yesterday. Now, my child, for Willie's and Annie's sake, don't go abroad. You will have a letter from our chaplain. I myself can say no more. Only God bless and keep you both. Mother A. Dyer. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. Mother. There were half a dozen crosses to represent kisses. Having already exonerated Polly and Arthur from any blame, Annie expressed her relief that charges against her daughter had been dropped due to lack of evidence. With a return to her salvationist beliefs, she thus prepared for the end. 4 executions were scheduled at Newgate for the second week of June. Milsom and Fowler, the Muswell Hill murderers, and Seaman, the Mile End murderer, were due to be hanged on the 9th of June, with Annie Dyer following them to perdition the next day. Executioner Billington and his assistant Wilkinson, described as a promising pupil, were in for a busy time. The 3 men were dispatched within 4 minutes, and the traditional black flag was hoisted above the prison gates. In order to spare Annie Dyer's feelings and possibly to relieve the pressure on condemned cells, she was moved in great secrecy from Newgate to Holloway before this murderous trio was hanged. As soon as Billington's task was completed, she was brought back again. By this time, the graves dug to receive the bodies of the 3 men had been filled with the black shells containing their lime-covered bodies. Once the flagstones had been replaced in this dismal precinct of the prison, all vestiges of the first day's executions were removed. Annie made a final statement, which was intended once and for all to remove any blame from her daughter's shoulders and to clear up 1 or 2 mysteries of the missing children. Although long and detailed, it achieved neither of these purposes. Annie began referring to the child my daughter had from Gloucester, the one I learned she is charged with murdering, the one she says she herself took to Birmingham. She continued, "My daughter has only to say that, hoping in some way to screen me, but the truth of the disappearance of that child is this. I myself, the day after my daughter brought that child to me from Gloucester, took the same, a girl, to London. I intended taking her to Foundling Hospital. I knew once there the child would be all right. She was very heavy to carry, and whether I had forgotten where the hospital I wanted was, or whether I had lost my way, I could not tell now. But I found myself outside a large church. I saw the side gate was open. I heard singing, I think, and I went to the vestry. The child was asleep, and I had laid her down just outside the door. I never intended any harm should come to her. I felt sure someone would be coming out, and the child would be cared for. I don't remember distinctly when I got home if I told her, Polly Palmer, what I had done. But I have an idea I told her I took it to the Foundling Hospital. I am speaking truthfully. It is doubtful if Annie herself knew precisely what she had done with each child that came to her into her hands, or indeed if she even recognized the truth. She went on in her statement to mention the baby girl Granny Smith had called Ikey. The little girl came with me, and that child was handed over to her with me, to her mother, on Paddington platform, in the presence of my son-in-law who accompanied me. I never did let my daughter or her husband know the truth of what I did. She said, I am telling the truth in this matter. They never did know. She absolved the Palmers from any complicity in the deaths of Doris Marmon and Harry Simmons. The statement my daughter made to magistrates is perfectly true. Neither Mary Ann Palmer nor her husband ever had anything in the world to do with either. Neither did they know I meant any harm to either of these children. I little thought, she said, referring to the episode which occurred at the Palmer's house in Williston, that anyone could see the parcel under the sofa, for I tied it up neatly in a napkin. And I can speak truthfully and say not in any one case have they helped me or knew what I was going to do. I never made her anyone a confidant. What was done I did myself. My only wonder is I did not murder all the house when I have had these awful temptations on me. Poor girl! It seems such a dreadful thing to think she would suffer all this through me. I hope and trust you will believe what I say, for it is perfectly correct, and I know she herself will speak the truth, and what she says I feel sure you can believe. Annie Dyer's consistent attempts to exonerate her daughter were possibly the woman's only redeeming characteristic. And while she never sought any pity for herself, neither did she express any regret over what she had done. The morning of her execution, the 10th of June, 1896, dawned with dull, overcast skies. The atmosphere was heavy, and the skies opened with teeming rain at those entrusted with the final preparations for Annie's remaining hours on earth went about their business. The prisoner in the condemned cell had a disturbed night, tossing and turning, and according to her attendants, sobbing and muttering in a fitful sleep. When she was allowed to dress, she donned the clothes which she had worn in the dock when sentence of death was passed upon her, and she struggled with a breakfast for which she had little stomach. Executioner Billington and his assistant had stayed overnight in the prison, and at first light they tested the scaffold and made ready. A few minutes before 9 a.m., Billington entered the condemned cell, strap in hand, to pinion the prisoner's arms. At the sight of him, Annie suddenly collapsed and had to be supported by two wardresses. While her arms were fastened, a procession of officials lined up, headed by the prison chaplain and including the governor of Newgate Prison, Lieutenant Colonel Millman. Annie partly walked and was partly carried the short distance to the scaffold. She was quickly placed under the beam, and while the chaplain was still reading the burial service, Billington pulled the lever, and her 15 stone dropped through the trap. Death was instantaneous, and the black flag was hoisted above the prison for the second day running. This signal that the execution had been carried out was greeted with some hooting from the crowd assembled outside the prison. Any further demonstration from those gathered there was dampened by the heavy rain which had fallen unceasingly since dawn, and the police had an easy task dispersing them. Later that morning, at coroner's inquest on the body, concluded that the execution had been satisfactory and humanely carried out. Death was due to fracture and dislocation of the neck. Within hours of Annie's death on the scaffold, the contents of her house and reading were being sold by auction. As the house was small and the number of persons interested was large, the auction was conducted in the street. Nearly 1,000 people, mainly women, gathered like vultures to maul over Annie's effects. The bedsteads and bedding fetched good prices. Two quilts went for 4s. 6d, and a child's cradle for 5 shillings. The total sum realized by the sale was about £7.15, and the auction was interrupted by a sudden and violent thunderstorm, an apt comment from the heavens, perhaps, on the whole sordid business. There was no protest about Annie Dyer's execution. A newspaper report the following day summed up the general mood. The utterly despicable character of Mrs. Dyer's crime may be judged from the fact that not a single word had been raised by the public or the press on behalf of the commutation of her sentence to penal servitude on the ground that she is a woman. She has gone to the gallows, up unpitied and hated. For Mrs. Dyer no one ever asked for mercy, and no hope has ever been held out since her plea of insanity failed. But then, as Annie herself had observed of the public's attitude, all of them trying to hang me. It was never established how many infants had gone to the early graves as a result of passing through Annie's hands. As she had been baby farming for 15 years, it is likely that she adopted, boarded, and dispatched a considerable number. Certainly the 7 young bodies found in the river Thames at Reading had all been murdered and disposed of in the same way. Strangulation with a tape knotted under the left ear, with the body weighted and sent to a watery grave was Annie's method. Indeed, after the trial, she said, "You'll know all mine by the tape round their necks." About 4 years after execution, some interesting discoveries were made in the garden of a house she had once occupied in Bristol. In the course of digging the garden, somebody disinterred some human remains. Further digging exposed the remains of 4 children's bodies. Inquests were held on these grim discoveries, but no firm conclusions were reached. There was another sequel to the trial and execution of Annie Dyer. About 2 years after, Arthur and Polly Palmer, who then lived in Oxfordshire, were charged at Exeter with abandoning an infant child. It was proved that an advertisement had been placed in a Plymouth newspaper by the Palmers offering to adopt a child. In response, a Davenport woman arranged for them to adopt her 3-month-old infant and paid over a fee of £14 when Polly Palmer received the infant and fee. She left Plymouth by train and changed at Newton Abbey. It was there that railway workers found the child next morning abandoned in a carriage which had been shunted into a siding. The baby, stripped of its clothing and wrapped up in brown paper, had been put under a seat, and if its cries had not attracted attention, it might well have died. The Palmers were found guilty, and each was sentenced to 2 years' hard labor. An extraordinary feature of Reading baby farmer was the way in which she had consistently tried to take any blame away from her daughter and son-in-law. Equally difficult to understand was that the Palmers were prepared to let her do it. Annie became a willing scapegoat in a money-making enterprise which certainly involved them, and Granny Smith in its intricate planning details. It is inconceivable that they did not know what was going on, and that they did not knowingly enjoy the benefits derived from the traffic in babies. Annie was utterly callous throughout, and did not even hesitate in her cruel purpose on sight of the tears shed by young women parting with their babies, in the fond belief that she would care for them. Any love that she had in her was directed towards her daughter, to whom she was fiercely protective. Her most governing passion was an evil streak, which she herself alluded to in her last statement as awful temptations. Perhaps the most satisfactory outcome of the case was the appreciation expressed by Reading Corporation's Watch Committee of the efforts of the Reading Bureau Police in apprehending Annie Dyer. Sergeant James and Inspector Anderson each received a check and a vote of thanks. And so concluded a case which a journalist reporting the details for a popular Sunday newspaper described in these words: "Like Pelion piled on Ossa are the sensational incidents in connection with the Reading child murders. The tale of slaughtered babes grows even greater, and as body after body is drawn from the reeking ooze of the Thames bed, one may well fancy the watchers, with staring eyeballs, cry like Macbeth, 'Will the line stretch out to crack of doom?'"
We are, as a people, inherently and historically. Opposed to secret societies, opposed to secret oaths, opposed to secret proceedings, secret proceedings. No official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.